Does everybody know the same woman that you know?
Are you talking about my wife?
Yeah.
Some people here do, probably most don't. They don't know my wife, Camille.
Right, but the people that do know her, do they all know the same wife that you know?
Perhaps not to the degree, but what's true of my wife, to the degree that they're accurate about her, then everybody knows Camille. They could identify her as such. And they don't know her to the degree I do, but that doesn't mean that what they know of her is not true.
Right. But don't they know her in different contexts?
Sure.
So they might not ever see the wife, mother, Camille, right?
As long as they didn't deny that she was a wife and mother,
Right, but
then that would be perfectly legitimate.
right. So, but isn't that the same way with God, that we can know different parts of God based on different roles that God plays in our lives?
Yeah, I think that's true, but I think the analogy still holds that say if someone were to say something untrue about my wife, that they would be wrong, no matter how devoutly they believed it. They would be wrong about my wife. I mean, they might say wonderful things about my wife, but if they were not true of her, then they would be false.
Right, and I'm not denying that. I'm just suggesting, does your wife work?
Very hard at home.
Okay. All right. She belongs to any groups that you don't belong to? Or do anything that you don't
Sure,
do?
yeah.
Okay. So in those contexts, I'm sorry, I don't mean to pry, but you open the door.
That's she's a far more attractive person than I am. So if we focus on her, that'd be great.
Let's just say, let's take, I don't know. She belongs to a book club.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
Wow, that was good. That was divinely inspired. So she belongs to a book club, and let's say you don't belong to the book club. So in that context, she discusses books, right? So people know her as a book reader, right? And that's how they get to know her. They don't get to know her in the day-to-day conversations that you do, you know, in the home life, et cetera, et cetera. That's all I'm suggesting in terms of God. Some people know God as the book reader. Some people know God as the wife and mother.
And I think there's some legitimacy to that, as long as there were other people who said, no, Camille hates books. Which, in my analogy, what if someone were to say God is personal and God is not personal? One of those has to be wrong.
Why?
Law of non-contradiction. A cannot be A and not A in the same way at the same time. I mean, either my wife is a book reader or she's not.
But here's the thing. God doesn't necessarily have to be subject to the laws of human rationality.
As you said it, I would say, yes, you're right. But I think that the laws of rationality flow from the mind of God himself. And so when we talk about the law of non-contradiction, why is it not the case that God has created a world where apples are apples and oranges are oranges, and an apple's not an apple?
Does God eat?
An apple's not an orange.
Does God eat?
No.
Okay, so if God doesn't eat, if he's not subject to these laws and constrictions that he put on us, why would he be then constrained by the laws and constrictions of logic?
I don't understand him eating. I think when he looks at an apple, he says that's an apple, not an orange. And
right.
If he were to say that it was an orange when it was in fact an apple, he'd be wrong, which is an unthinkable thing.
Right, but God made us have to eat.
Sure.
Right? We have to eat things.
Yeah.
God doesn't. Right? God says you have to use logic. So why does he have to use human logic?
I guess I can't understand. I can't answer the question either way. Then we live in God's world. This is the world of his creation. And so the laws of logic, truth versus a lie, apple versus orange, When God created apples, he created apples. And when he created oranges, he created oranges. And it's a legitimate thing to identify them as such. And when I misidentify them, I'm wrong.
Sure.
Yeah.
You're wrong. Don't make God wrong. And to be honest, we're the ones who called it an apple and an orange.
Sure. Yeah. That's
right.
Yeah.
So if God calls it, God can call it whatever he wants.
Yeah, sure.
But we're the ones who are constrained by that.
Well, I think you're missing the larger point here is that there's a certain kind of an entity that God created, and then there's another kind of an entity that he created, and they're not the same. I think, I don't know any other way to say that other than repeating myself.
Perhaps we can move on. Perhaps Dr. Miles, you have a question you might ask.
Sure. The whole idea of interpretation, you said words are open to interpretation, and I completely agree with that, but is every interpretation valid?
Not necessarily.
I mean, what if I were to sit here and I said to you, boy, thank you for making my point for me, because you demonstrated the exclusive claims of Christ.
How?
That's how I choose to interpret you.
Okay, cool.
Really?
Sure.
Wow.
Does it work for you?
I thought you were a debate coach. I mean, is that how they judge debate?
But my point is, your interpretation may be valid if you see it that way. If that helps you make your point, that helps you make your path, if that helps make you a better person, good.
So you have no trouble with people misunderstanding you or misinterpreting you or taking you out of context?
Well, sure.
Why? It helps me.
Because I'm human and I'm fallible and I have an ego.
So trying to make a point and wanting to be understood by what you meant it entails fallibility?
Well, sure, I'm human. I am fallible.
That's not what I said. That's not what I said. No, wait. No. You said that I like to be understood by what I meant because I'm fallible. I don't think that. I don't think one entails the other.
Well, they don't necessarily. Well, it's not that they entail the other, but they're possibilities, one because of the other. But here's the issue. Why, or not why? That's not what I want to say. I go back to that pedagogy point that I made. If I know that student X isn't going to be able to learn semiotics, I teach semiotics, isn't going to be able to learn semiotics by my normal standard lecture, wouldn't it behoove me as a good teacher to find a different way to make that student understand semiotics?
Yes. It would. And I think that the biblical story accounts for that God is very creative, and he has given his word, the law, and finally culminating in Jesus Christ. But what he has not done, and maybe this is just, I don't think this is the case, but you might suggest this is a limitation of me. He does not give one set of teachings or one style that leads to a certain conclusion that doesn't equate with who he actually is. And so I think ultimately it's nonsensical to say that God has provided this path for himself and you get to a certain place, and then he's provided another path to himself that gets you to a completely different place. That is, we arrive with completely different, incompatible ideas about who God is. I don't see what's wrong with saying that someone is right and someone is wrong. And that if people are pursuing a path that's wrong, it doesn't behoove us to say, you know what, I think you're wrong there.
But who are you to decide that the path is wrong?
Me, in and of myself, I'm not. That's why we depend upon revelation.
Right. But maybe there's more than one revelation.
I guess that's potentially possible, but how do we arbit between the two?
And that would be my point. It's not my job to decide that your path is wrong or my path is the right path.
But in not judging, you're judging. I mean, you've set up some sort of standard. My standard of completely honest, and which it was obvious, wasn't it? It's the scriptures, God's revelation. That's how I judge truth claims, especially when it comes to God. All right, and so that's the standard, the Word of God. If it's me just kind of looking at it and evaluating, then I've elevated my own thinking, my convenience, whatever, to the standard by which I'm going to arbitrate between truth claims. At least for me, I'm saying this is God. I mean, which...
But isn't it possible for a Muslim reading the Quran to make that same judgment?
That
their standards.
Yes, I think it is absolutely the case. I mean, hopefully, I'm sure there are devoted Muslims. I mean, that's obvious, right? But that doesn't mean that we can't have a conversation and debate, and for me to say, you know what, I think you're wrong, and I care enough about you to say that I think you're wrong, and I would respect him enough to do that. Just as my guess is that he would say to me, no, I think you're wrong, and here's why. And we can have a discussion, and then we can evaluate between the two.
Right, that's my point. We can respect that we have differences.
Except not the part about being right or wrong. I mean,
but that's the whole point of religion. You don't follow a religion that you think is wrong, right? You follow the religion that you believe in your heart of hearts is right.
I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
Okay. Does believing make it right? I mean, is that our epistemological standard?
What else do we have?
We have a standard. Hopefully
that's written down in your book.
Sure. And it would be irresponsible of me not to evaluate the truth claims of other religions.
Right, and I think it would be irresponsible of other religions not to evaluate the truth claims of Christianity. And they may reach a different conclusion.
They might, but the question is, are they right or not?
And you know what? In my informant in the Muslim faith, or not Muslim, Mormon faith, she had the best response to this. Because I asked her, I said, well, what do you do with people like Buddhists and environmentalists and people who don't follow the Bible? And her response said, well, that's why we do missionary work. That's why we witness, to introduce people to the Word of God as they see it. But the interesting thing was, I said, so what happens if they go, oh, thanks, that was nice, but no, not for me. The best response was, she said, well, we believe, and again, I asked people from different religions and asked them to speak for their whole religion. And what she said is, we believe that we are not to judge. God will make the determination at the appropriate time. So it's not for us to decide that you're on the wrong path. This is the right path, and this is the path that we believe is the right path. But we can't judge you and say that yours is the wrong path. And I thought that was very smart.
I wish that would be representative of the Mormons who come and knock on my doors. Because we usually have a discussion. I heard you say a number of times that there's such a cultural determination that various people grow up, say you might grow up Muslim or whatever, isn't it natural that you would be Muslim? And I agree with that in a descriptive sense, but not necessarily in a prescriptive sense. Because, I mean, what if I'd grown up in Nazi Germany? Does that make Nazism right?
No.
Why?
Because they're not trying to be good people.
I think that's probably not fair. I think you're on the outside judging their actions as right or wrong. And I would agree with you that their actions...
Some judgments are no-brainers.
I'm assuming you do. I do think that begs the question of whether judgment is a legitimate thing or not. What's the standard by which you're judging?
Right, and I would judge them based on my faith, my religion. And my religion would say, no, what they did was a horrible, bad thing. So in that regard, if we're going to test their truth claims based on my religion, then yes, I can make that judgment that as a whole, that movement was wrong, based on my truth claims. Now, like you said, I'm sure
I agree with that.
There were lots of Nazis, I know, there were lots of Nazis who believed that they were doing the right thing. And unfortunately, they were looking at the scriptures of Mein Kampf And so that wasn't necessarily a good testament to go by. But if you look at the idea that Nazis were not trying to do good for other people, and that's what most religions, at least the people that I talk to in religions, so that's one of the parts of being